Hey everyone, welcome to Ohio Protects Pollinators. This is our first webinar series at ODNR, and just like plants and animals adapt to changes, we're adapting to changes in our environment right now and trying to bring some of the outdoors to you through this new webinar series. My name is Alyssa Yapel, and I work for ODNR, and I want to introduce you to my coworkers here from our Division of Parks and Watercraft, who are going to be helping me today with this webinar. I have Jenna Winters, who, Jenna, can you wave? Jenna is going to be helping me with questions and answers today, so please utilize the Q&A option that's available to you. Ask us questions throughout, and we will try and relay those to our presenters here, who are Mandy Wolski from Cowan Lake State Park, who is one of our naturalists doing a virtual pollinator hunt and teaching us more about some flowers that pollinators visit. And then also we have Lauren Broderick from Maumee Bay State Park, who is going to teach us how to make some seed balls later. So I'm going to hand this off to Mandy now.
Hi, I hope my computer works now. My name is Mandy, and I'm coming to you live from Cowan Lake State Park in Southwest Ohio. So our pollinators want to survive just as much as we do, and so do the plants that they go to for pollen and nectar. So when you see a flower, its color helps attract pollinators, and it offers them food and drink, which are things that all of us need. So what exactly is pollination, and how do those bees get that done? So if you open up the inside of a flower, there are a ton of different little pieces in there. So what you need, if you are a bee, what you are doing is collecting pollen off of the anther, and you are then going to transfer it to the stigma, the big part right there in the middle. And I hope that made sense. So we're going from our anther to our stigma to pollinate. And it works the same way with all flowers. And if you want to try it at home, these big flowers like tulips, irises, and daffodils work really well to find these parts, since you don't need a magnifying glass. So who are Ohio's pollinators? Let's take a look at what we have. So here in Ohio, we have the same kind of pollinators that you find in most parts of the United States. We have both butterflies and moths. We also have bees and wasps. And believe it or not, beetles and flies also help pollinate our plants. So hummingbirds is a good one. When they take a drink of nectar, that pollen gets on their forehead. And when they go to the next flower to take a drink, that pollen comes off their forehead and goes on to the flower. So you saw a picture of a bat. Our bats here in Ohio are not pollinators for us. They eat insects. So we call those insectivores. However, I get that question a lot here at Cowan Lake because there are bats around the world called fruit bats. And when they are eating the fruit, they're also pollinating. So here in the United States, though they don't pollinate for us, they are an important pollinator around the world. So what can you guys do for pollinators? I'm going to let Lauren handle that for you.
All right. Again, my name is Lauren Roderick. I'm the naturalist here at Maumee Bay, and a really good question we get is, what can we do for pollinators? Pollinators are really neat, as Mandy went through and talked about what it means for pollination, but a big one that people usually love, the pollinators people usually love to see, are butterflies. And so we're going to go through and talk a little bit about what we can do to specifically attract butterflies, but the nice part is when we attract butterflies, we also attract a lot of other pollinators. So my big thing is I'm a big proponent of gardening with native plants. Native plants attract native pollinators. They also are literally meant to be here. So they typically do a lot better and they're a lot easier to care for than our non-native, more landscape plants. Attract a whole bunch of wildlife. They help us support healthy ecosystems. They can help things such as prevent erosion, encourage a diverse wildlife, both small and big, and most importantly, they provide food and shelter. Shelter is often an overlooked thing when we're talking about pollinators, specifically butterflies, because even butterflies have to go somewhere and find a place to sleep at night. So attracting butterflies, just like anything else, they have food, shelter, and water. By planting host plants, not only are you providing food for them, you can often give them shelter. You greatly increase the chance of bringing them to your yard that way, and you get to see the whole entire life cycle, which is also a bonus. A lot of things that could be used for shelter are things like tall grasses, shrubs, trees, even literally piles of sticks. I have a firewood pile at my house, and we often find moths and butterflies that are hanging out there trying to hide from the rain and sleeping there at night. Food, just like we have to eat, they have to eat. Providing nectar sources for the adults, and then providing something for the larvae to eat, the babies to eat, and water. Most of the time, nectar sources will be adequate. However, some butterflies actually like to eat rotting fruit, even bird poop. So you don't necessarily have to provide the birds' droppings for them. The birds usually will do that for you, but you can put out fruit that is starting to rot, maybe put it on the top of your compost pile, and you might actually find a lot of butterflies actually hanging out on that rotten fruit, which is usually neat to see. So here are some examples of butterfly host plants. Today, we are actually going to be making a seed ball for specifically the monarch butterfly here. They use milkweed species, and they are actually very specialized in the sense that they only will eat, their larvae will only feed off of those milkweed species. However, you'll find butterflies such as the American snout, hackberry, emperor, and mourning cloak. They'll use tree species, hackberry trees. Willow trees will use a whole, you'll see the Viceroy, the mourning cloak as well, and the red spotted purple. And you might notice on this, those butterflies are in multiple categories. They are more generalist species. They'll feed on a variety of things. So as you can tell, there are some many different plants that we can provide as host plants for our butterflies to attract to our yard. So the monarch butterfly. This is usually one of the most recognized butterfly. They have these nice bright coloration. It's actually a warning. Milkweed makes their larvae, their caterpillars, poisonous, and by default makes the adults poisonous as well. They're poisonous to birds, which would be typically their main predator. But this bright coloration is actually acting as warning, say, hey, leave me alone. But the great part is if we provide milkweed for our monarch butterflies, we will actually get an abundance of other pollinators. Milkweed has a fantastic flower that provides multiple sources for food for other animals to eat. So there's a variety of milkweeds that we can find here in Ohio. Specifically, the seed ball we're making today is using the common milkweed, which, like its name suggests, it is very common, and it can grow in a variety of areas, but you can find milkweeds that can grow down deep into the swamps to tolerate more shade. So that's something that you can find and order seeds online if you're interested. So this butterfly here looks very similar to our monarch, the Viceroy. It's easily confused, but what's nice about it, if you look at the bottom of the wing, it has a band across that this monarch butterfly is lacking. So it is usually a dead giveaway if there is that band across that hind wing that it is not a monarch. The adults of the Viceroy actually feed off a variety of plants, milkweed is included, so it can sometimes be confusing. You think you have a monarch butterfly and a milkweed plant, and it's actually not. It's a mimic. However, their caterpillars feed on trees in the willow family as well as the cottonwood, and their caterpillars and pupa actually look like bird droppings. It's a very good defense mechanism. If you look like poop, nobody's going to want to eat you. The great spangled fritillary. The great spangled fritillary is a very large butterfly. It's you usually find it in open meadows, and it feeds on a variety of violet species. And what's really nice about violet species is you can find them in a variety of places, even in urban areas. I actually have with me, this is a common violet. I live in the middle of a city, and I have these growing in my yard. I mean, literally in the middle of a city, and I get these. So you can often find butterflies and their host plants, even places that you would not expect. The common Buckeye. They are boldly patterned. They use toad flax, and toad flax is actually a beautiful, cute little plant, and they can also feed on snapdragons. So if you have the non-native snapdragon, you might actually find some caterpillars on it, and that might be our Buckeye caterpillar. They have these bright eye spots, these big, large eye spots to actually deter predators, but they like low vegetation, and the flowering dogwood is also an excellent nectar source for them, and it is a great landscape tree that is also native. And this one is one of my favorite butterflies. This is the black swallowtail. They are very large and fast flying. Their caterpillars are bright green, and you can often find them on fennel and dill. So if you're looking and picking out an herb garden and all of a sudden you're noticing the big blobs on your dill or fennel plant, it might be the black swallowtail. I often, when I go and buy my herbs, and if I find a dill with black swallowtail caterpillars on it, that's the plant I buy, because personally I like to see those. But just know, even plants that we eat, the caterpillars and pollinator larvae might actually like to eat them too. So usually I set aside and have basically a dedicated, the caterpillars can chomp at it, plant in my garden as well. And the adults will feed on most nectar sources. These butterflies are very, very fast and very large. Here's a specialist species, swallowtail. They are often can be confused with the black swallowtail, but they have a lot less spotting. Their larva feeds on spicebush and sassafras, so they're not as generalist. They're not going to be found on their larvae are not going to be found on the same species as the black swallowtail. However, their caterpillars actually look like snakes. It's a really neat defense mechanism. If you look like a predator, predators might leave you alone as well. And finally, this is one of the most common butterflies you'll find around the painted lady, very widespread throughout the US and throughout Ohio. Feeds on a variety of different sources as adults, and the larvae feed on over 100 different types of plants. So they are very much so a generalist species. And they are very, very neat little cute butterflies, and their larvae are quite intense looking. So remember, it does not have to have a flower to attract native wildlife. That's a big thing. People, especially when they're thinking of pollinators, they get stuck up on what the adults feed on. However, you do have to have stuff for the larvae, the full life cycle to go feed on, as well as provide shelter for them, place for them to rest and potentially hide and for food. So even things such as dead trees, brush, and bramble have a use. And when you're planting native plants in hopes to attract pollinators, you actually might attract other native wildlife as well. So you'll attract a diverse amount, as well as you might want to provide water features for the newfound wildlife you'll have in your yard. But things to consider: providing habitat for native wildlife can bring about all types of wildlife, not necessarily just the desired species. We can't specifically say, I just want monarch butterflies. So just consider that you might have stuff that animals and wildlife that you were not necessarily anticipating, but they might come. Also, as a gardener, plants grow where they want to grow. Even if you think this is the perfect spot, it matches all the ideal conditions, doesn't necessarily equal ideal plant growth. You'll have two plants right next to each other. One might be huge, the other might be small, and they have the exact same growing conditions, but there's little micro ecosystems underneath the dirt that we might not necessarily see that can change how plants grow. And be patient. They might not come right away, and if you provide the right habitat and the right requirements, they will come. So thank you, and we're going to go on to what can we do for our part for our pollinators? And we'll be making seed balls. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we are going to need the base for our seed balls. So what we're doing here with our seed balls is basically we are putting together portable seed planting devices, essentially. So what I have with me today is air dry clay. I use this specific clay because it is non-toxic. However, I'm in the Northwest glaciated region where Glacial Lake Warren used to be. So I actually have a lot of my own clay that I can dig up. So you can also use your own soil from your own backyard. But for ease of today, I'm going to use this air dry clay, and it is non-toxic, which is really important. If we're throwing this out into the environment, we want to make sure it's non-toxic as well. So I need my air dry clay. I need some seeds. I have a mix of seeds here, but I also have the native milkweed seeds as well. And you will need water, which I have here in a spray bottle. You can also use a glass of water, that works as well too. And basically some medium for the seeds to be started in. So I have with me potting soil as well as vermiculite. Vermiculite is basically a neutral seed starting mix, which will work really well, but potting soil or any soil that you have in your yard will also work. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get our clay out. So this is a little bit messy, so parents, if you're doing this in your house, I would recommend, especially little ones, put down some newspaper or do it outside on a really nice day because it can get a little bit messy. So I'll take my clay. You only need about a fist size clay, a small handful of clay, and you're just going to want to push it down flat, kind of make it look a little bit like a pancake. So I'm going to push it down flat. It's okay if it crumbles a little bit. We have our water with us today that will help everything stick together and make it more fun because it's more of a mess. So I have my flat piece of clay here. So next, I'm going to get a little bit of my soil. We just need a pinch of soil. We don't need precise measurements for this. So here's a pinch of my soil. It takes up about 1/3 of the size of clay. Next, I'm going to use my milkweed seeds. Specifically, if you're using milkweed seeds just from a pod, I would recommend not opening the pod inside because milkweed uses wind dispersal, and they have this nice silk that if you open a milkweed pod inside the house, it'll look like it's been snowing inside your house for days. So just keep that in mind. So here's our nice silk that usually helps our milkweed seed travel. But I have already picked out almost all of the silk for my milkweed seeds. So here's an example of what the common milkweed seed look like. And I'm doing about 2-to-1 ratio of soil to clay. So here's that, and I'll do a pinch of my seeds here. Put the excess back. And I am actually just going to take this soil and take these seeds and just mix them together. Nice and simple. It's okay to get your hands a little bit dirty and mix them together. And when you have it all nice and mixed, what I recommend you do is either you take your spray bottle or you take your cup of water, get your hands wet, and get the middle of this clay wet. You don't want it soaking, just a nice little spray for this in this case, or just a dab of water on it, just enough to get it sticky, but not too sticky where it's goopy. So then we're going to put this soil in on the top like this, almost like we're making a pizza. Wouldn't recommend eating this pizza though. It's for the pollinators. And we're going to roll it up. So this is the really messy part because remember our clay is wet plus wet soil equals a little bit of mud. That's okay. Little dirt never hurt. So we're going to mix this up. Try to distribute it as evenly as possible, but again, doesn't have to be exact by any means. I like to make sure I get all of my seeds collected I have some excess on the plate, so I just roll it around and it's still wet enough and sticky enough. Now, if nothing is sticking, just get it wet again. And if it's too sticky, you can always add more clay or more dirt. So now we have it distributed. So it's going to look like this. Much darker. You might see some of the seeds sticking out. What's really nice about this clay in particular, if we get it wet after it's dried, it actually will dissolve rather quickly. So we know the seeds are going to be able to get back into the environment where they need the little boost from our potting soil. So next what we're going to do, this is a rather large ball, so I'm going to break them off into about marble-sized balls. Got my marble-sized balls here. Those are a little larger marbles. And you can do it any size. You can actually get them so small enough they'll fit in your pocket. And so if you have a lot of property, you can walk out through and just toss them in the right, where the right light requirements and right water requirements will be. And that's a big thing when you're selecting your seed. Make sure you know where you want these seeds to go. Make sure, especially if you're planting them out in a big open area, you want to try to use natives if at all possible. And you want to make sure you have permission to drop the seed where they're supposed to be. So I have my seeds here, my seed ball here. And so I would love to go just chunk these outside right now. However, there is one more step when we're doing these seed balls. We need to make sure we give them a chance to dry, and it takes about 2 to 3 days to fully dry. The biggest part is you want to make sure you put them in an area that is cool and dry and not in direct sunlight. So you want them to be able to dry fully, not be too hot to overly bake the seeds, but not be in direct sunlight because we do have water in here and it might start germination a little bit too early. What I usually like to do is I like to use a paper bag. It allows for the seed balls to breathe a little bit, in the sense let them fully dry, but it prevents that direct sunlight. And so essentially just put them in a paper bag. Let them sit for 2 to 3 days, and what you'll end up is actually with a ball like this. These are hard, and I can actually go chunk these out in my yard, and in a few days I might see some sprouts. When you're choosing seeds for the seed balls, I do recommend using plants that do not require the seeds to be sown very deep. The milkweed seeds work really well because they are wind dispersed, so their seeds are laying on top of the soil anyways. So just keep that in mind when you're selecting the plants that you would like to use specifically as well. So what we have with us is a Pollinator Bingo. And we have a challenge for you. So now we figured out what we can do for pollinators at our house, and we have a challenge with Pollinator Bingo, so what you can find throughout. And here is.
Oh, sorry. Hey, Lauren, it's Alyssa. I'm going to put this on our digital discoveries page where everybody can find these 2 documents after the webinar.
Perfect. And so when you're doing your Pollinator Bingo, you'll see some different things that pollinators will use, and I have a challenge for you. So if you see any of those things on Pollinator Bingo, so basically pollinator habitat or a pollinator, you can share that photo on your social media and use the hashtag Ohio Protects Pollinators. And so we'd love to see what you find, what pollinators are in your area. And with that, we'll go back to Mandy.
Hi, everyone. While you guys were talking with Lauren, I went out at Cowan Lake and it is pouring down rain outside. I didn't get very far and I got soaked, even with an umbrella. Trying to find somewhere to look for some pollinators with you is kind of impossible right now. Our pollinators are a little bit smart, just like we are. So when it's raining, they stay somewhere safe and protected so their wings don't get too wet and they don't get drenched and they don't drown. But I had a backup plan. So what I wanted to share with you today was some ways that you can go out and look for pollinators together as a family. This is a really fun thing to do. One of the first places that you should look is near flowers. So some of the pollinators that I'm going to show you today, I collected one off of a dandelion. I collected multiple off of this plant, which is called a butterweed. And you may have this in your yard. This is called ground ivy. It's got really tiny purple flowers on it, and it can grow in a huge patch. This is a type of mustard or a cress. I couldn't figure it out, but I found probably 7 or 8 of the pollinators I'm going to show you on this plant specifically. Now, my favorite one that I was looking at yesterday was the Buckeye tree. And that is your state tree, by the way. We have one right outside the naturalist cabin here at Cowan. And this is what the flowers look like right now on your Buckeye tree. So these were covered with all kinds of pollinators yesterday. I found a fly, I found wasps, I found bees, and I even found a queen bumblebee nectaring from these flowers. Now, I didn't keep her to share with you because she's got a really important job right now, and that's making sure that her hive is successful. But I did find some that I would love to share, and I was hoping we could release them today after during the program, but I don't want to put them out in the rain. So one of them I want to show you is a dark paper wasp. And this paper wasp is a very important pollinator. I happened to find this wasp on the Buckeye tree, and I don't want him to get stuck. So I'm going to put him right back. I also found a fly, and this fly is just like any fly you get at home. Let's see if he'll come out and visit us. So he can take off in here. They like to be in the building. So that's just a common house fly, and he left me. But there are some, here's another one. This is called a green metallic sweat bee. Now, a lot of the sweat bees that you will see outside are actually flies, and they mimic what these bees look like. But this one is definitely a real bee. So why are they so calm for me? I have been to OSU and have learned exactly what to do to make sure they stay nice and calm. But once they wake up, and this one is starting to move, they will fly away, and they are all going to be perfectly safe and re-released here at Cowan tomorrow. So no worries. It's really hard to show these. I found a really neat bee yesterday. I found quite a few of them actually, and it's called a small carpenter bee. Now, many of you know about those big bees. They come to your house and they burrow into your deck, and mom and dad may not like them very much. I know my dad does not like them. But here in Ohio, they are native, and we also have another carpenter bee that is native. Now, you guys remember how big those carpenter bees are that come to your house? This is our small carpenter bee. So very, very tiny. Oh, and now he's on my laptop. They are very small, and they don't dig into your house like the big carpenter bees are going to do. Some of the pollinators that I looked for yesterday to share with you guys were beetles. I did not locate any, but where can you go to find those? So you can find beetles. They do go to flowers, and they do walk around inside the flower. So if you see something that is on a flower, but you're not sure that it looks like a bee, it could be a beetle. I also didn't find any moths or butterflies yesterday. It is still a little early down here. We have been seeing some of our butterflies, our cabbage whites, and they are out. I've seen some hackberry, not the hackberry emperor. We've seen quite a few of our butterflies that they live during the winter here in our leaf litter. And while I was out looking for pollinators, another good spot is in the leaf litter. I happened to come across this. So this is the cocoon of one of our moth species. So in the fall, we normally do not get rid of our leaf litter at home. We leave that in our garden. We leave it here at the woods. And this is why. Some of our moth species and our butterfly species will overwinter either as a chrysalis or a cocoon and then emerge in spring. I'm not sure how old this one is. This could be from a couple years, but while you're digging through the leaf litter, especially in fall, pay attention. You might find one that's still in there. My favorite place to look for beetles is to find an old dead log and just dig in. And that's what I wanted to do with you today. I have this perfect log outside that I can dig through, and it's filled with ants, but also find a lot of beetles. Another good spot to look, like I had mentioned, is in our flowering trees. That is one that most people don't think about. So definitely if you have a flowering tree in your yard, like a magnolia, or an eastern redbud, or a dogwood, or even a buckeye like this one, definitely look at those.
So, Mandy, do you and Lauren want to maybe answer some questions from the folks joining us today? Okay.
Absolutely.
1 second. Okay. So we had someone ask, can you place a bird feeder in your pollinator garden, or is that frowned upon? And Jenna had answered in the Q&A there, but I thought that other viewers may want to hear the answer as well.
I often place them in the pollinator areas. You'll get a variety. It depends on specifically if you have a hummingbird feeder. Do note that you probably will have pollinators visiting and nectaring off of your hummingbird feeder. A variety of insects. That sugar water is great energy for a lot of animals. But if you're doing directly like a bird seed feeder, a lot of the seed eaters, with the exception of during breeding season, are mostly going to focus on those seeds. Now, if it's during the middle of breeding season, they have to switch to more protein to feed those baby chicks that are growing. But oftentimes pollinators, like specifically the monarch butterfly, don't taste good, so they're not going to be, you don't have to worry about them getting eaten. But do note there might be some predation. Mandy?
So here at Cowan in our butterfly garden, we have, instead of a house for pollinators to live in or for birds to live in, what we did was we took a really shallow pan and we put tiny little rocks inside that pan, and then we filled it with just enough water so that the water level is below those rocks. So what's going to happen is both the birds and the pollinators go to that little pan to drink. So you may think that there's enough nectar inside those flowers for our bees and our butterflies, but they definitely do need water as well. And that's an easy thing you can do at home to help your bees get some hydration.
So when I answered the question, I think my picture is lagging here a little bit. I kind of went in the middle with it because yes, you can put your bird feeders in a pollinator garden. And while most birds are pretty particular about what they eat and they will just stay with seeds, most birds are not going to pass by a juicy bug if it happens by. So it's not an absolute that you can't put your bird feeder there. But if you're really into pollinators and you're really trying to create habitat for pollinators, you probably want to move your bird feeder over on the other side of the yard.
Yes, yes.
Someone just asked if the sound was muted on our end, and yeah, so Teams Live doesn't have the option for attendees, unfortunately, to be unmuted and ask questions. But if you ask them in the Q&A section, we're happy to answer any questions you have. So please let us know. One other question someone wrote in with is, how did you guys get into working with pollinators?
Mandy, I'll let you go first if you'd like.
Oh, good. So I started out as a bird watcher, and when you're watching birds, you're looking for something that's flying. And when you are looking for the really small birds, you start to see the butterflies, and then you see the dragonflies and the wasps and the bees. And so it just was kind of a nice little jump from birds to other flying things. However, with the birds, we were doing what is called citizen science. So my husband and I were using an app on our phones to report what birds we were seeing. We really like the app iNaturalist because it doesn't just allow you to share what you find, it helps you figure out what you have found. So in getting into the iNaturalist a little deeper, instead of just sharing birds, I started to share bees and butterflies to really learn the native species here in Ohio. And it helps me become a better naturalist, as I have learned all kinds of plants and insects, not just pollinators either. Some of these really hard to ID beetles, you can get help on iNaturalist with that. So mine was kind of a progression from other things that I loved in nature. What about you, Lauren?
So like you, Mandy, I started off as a bird watcher as well. Bird watching is a slippery slope to liking all things creepy crawly. It's all great. I'm actually originally from Texas, and I worked at a nature center down in Texas, and birds were my big thing. I liked birds and I liked fish. However, they had a butterfly house there, and it's really hard not to go from butterflies to all other insects. So it pretty much started at the nice big butterflies, and we went down to like in the smaller, and it's also really fun to challenge yourself to try to identify some of these things. It becomes like, oh, I can figure out what that one is. I wonder if I can figure out what that is. So just like you, Mandy, I started off with bird watching and just slid on down to going from larger to smaller.
Okay, guys, I don't know if you guys will know the answer to this or not, but we have someone wanting to know how to grow a Buckeye tree. Can you plant a Buckeye in regular soil? So I know this isn't on our pollinator topic, but do you guys have any advice for our viewer?
Buckeyes are riparian, so they're going to be needing the wetter soils. Oftentimes you'll find them specifically like around creeks and in low flowing areas. So just note you can't plant it somewhere where there is it's in a dry area would be my good recommendation. Do you have anything else, Mandy?
No, just to back up your theory, where our Buckeye tree grows here at the naturalist cabin, all the water comes rushing off the road right into the grass. So our Buckeye is nice and wet year round.
So that'd be a good rain garden plant. If you're trying to plant a rain garden, that'd be something to consider, along with buttonbush, which is an excellent pollinator plant and adorable flowers.
I'm going to add one thing to that. If you're trying to start one from seed, I'm sure if you're familiar with Buckeyes, you probably picked up the Buckeye nut, and it's really hard. So if you're going to try to plant one yourself, you're going to need to scarify the seed. Best thing to do, Google is your friend. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but basically you're going to have to help that plant come out of that seed because that covering is so hard. When they're out in nature, the seeds get drug around, they get chewed on by rodents, and so it can kind of happen naturally. If you're trying to grow them yourself, you're going to need to give it a little help. So Scarify is the word you're looking for. And they said, just look it up on Google. There'll be plenty of good advice there about how to break that seed open to get it growing.
Hey, Jenna, while you're talking, do you want to let everyone know the answer to the question that we had someone write in about native bumblebees making honey?
Oh, yeah, I thought that was a great question, actually. The question was, do native bumblebees make honey? And yes, they do, but not in the quantities that make it useful to humans. So a lot of people just think it's just the European honeybee that does it. They're the ones that most commonly, you think of when you think of honey. But our native bumblebees actually do make a little bit of honey, but just, like I said, nothing that's harvestable.
Cool. Well, I guess we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you all for joining us today. And we hope that you will join us for part 2 of Ohio Protects Pollinators next Wednesday. Also, keep an eye out for a new series that we'll be coming out with on awesome animal adaptations, and that will be with our friends from our Division of Wildlife. We should have that one out within the next couple of weeks. And if you want to find some great family activities and some awesome field videos from our naturalists and our biologists and foresters, please visit OhioDNR.gov and go to our digital discoveries page. You can find so much awesome content there that will keep you and your families busy at home. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye.